Hi everyone, this is Oksana. This is something I've wanted to make for a long time, but this is my ultimate beginner video for somebody making a wire framed pendant. So this is a wire frame that goes around the stone. It's a specific type of method of trapping in the stone, and it uses square wires and half round wires. So this is my ultimate beginner video where I'm gonna go through everything. Normally I just pretty quickly go through the process and it's more about the design and the decorations and things, but this is a really good video for somebody trying it for the first time because I'm gonna discuss everything: the wire, the tools, how to get the wire off the spool and straighten it, just every little thing. I'm going to talk about the stone, the easiest shape and size to use. I'm going to cover all of that, and the purpose of this video is just to be really beginner friendly and explain this process to somebody like they're doing it for the very first time. So hopefully that will be helpful to you, and let's get right into it. So first, let's talk about the stone. This is an Amazonite. It is a teardrop shape, and it is just a little bit, just a tiny smidge smaller than an inch, or if I were to measure it like super exactly in millimeters, it's probably like 28 millimeters. And what you want is a stone that's about an inch. You don't want it to be too much smaller than an inch. It can be a little bit bigger, but you also don't want it to be huge. The easiest to work with, at least for me personally, is about an inch. Once you start getting small, it's really hard to get into the fine little details. And once you start getting big, you have to use thicker, sturdier wire, or it starts feeling kind of floppy and not secure. So this is my stone, and I was going back and forth between an oval and a teardrop, and I decided to go with a teardrop because I do think that an upside down teardrop, if you hold it like this with the point down, is a little bit easier when you're making your frame, because for the oval it has to like sit in the frame and it can kind of move around. It's hard to get it perfect, but this, we're going to bend the frame into a point and it's just going to slide into that point, and it's just a little bit easier, I thought. So about an inch teardrop shaped stone, and it's also really important that it is a cabochon. So it's not impossible to work with non-cabochons, to work with tumbled stones, rough stones. But the easiest to get started for this wire frame is the cabochon. So what a cabochon is, if you're not familiar, you can search on Etsy or eBay, just search gemstone cabochon and you'll find like a ton of them. You can get really cheap ones. Some stones, are really affordable. So what a cabochon is it's flat on the back. See how it's just completely flat, and then it's domed. So it is kind of like, it used to be flat on the front, but then they rounded off this edge, if you know what I mean. So it's domed because it gets smaller as it gets to the front, and it's kind of rounded here on the front. So that's important for the frame to work as well. All right, so now that we've covered the stone, let's talk about the wire. All right, so this is my wire that I'm gonna be working with. And this is square copper wire. And the square part of it is important because for this frame, this specific framed design that we're doing here, square works the best. It's the easiest. It's not slippery like the round because it has flat edges. I'll show you a close-up so you can see why it's called square. And it really works the best. You can do it with round. Eventually, I do have a video where I alter the design slightly doing it with round, but for the purposes of this video, I'm trying to make everything as easy as possible. So we're going to use square bare wire. This is dead soft copper. Dead soft is also really important. When wire is sold, it has different hardnesses, and you can get half hard. And that's very hard to work with. It is very springy. You bend it and it kind of like springs back, doesn't want to bend. We need it to bend and stay in the shape that we bend it in. So dead soft is really important, and it might look like, oh wow, this like flimsy little thin wire is going to make our pendant, but it will work and it will be sturdy and it will be good. And 20 gauge is also important. That's kind of like the middle ground gauge for the size of stone that we're working with, and it is the easiest. So once you get comfortable with it, you can start working with smaller stones and you can get a smaller gauge. And the gauges that actually, even though they get smaller, the number gets bigger. So 21 gauge would be the next size down from 20, and it would be a little bit thinner. And that's what you would go to when you start working with slightly smaller stones. Like if you have a stone that is 1/2 inch, for example, that's a pretty small stone compared to ours, you would get 21 gauge. But for this video, 20 gauge, easiest, the most like middle ground wire. And then if eventually you want to start working with larger stones, you're going to have to get a thicker wire because it's just less sturdy if you're making something really huge. And so you would want to go down to 19 gauge or even 18 gauge. So as it gets smaller, it gets thicker. And I got this from riogrande.com or riogrande.com. It does come in these huge spools. So if you're just trying this out and you don't want to commit to a 1 pound spool of the wire, you could look on Etsy. There's a lot of people that resell on there in smaller quantities, and you would get just a small quantity to try it out. And when you are taking it off of your spool, it's going to have curves in it. It's going to potentially have little bends like this because the spools come with a little hole so you can like stop it from unraveling when you're done using it, but that puts little bends in it. So when you're taking it off of your spool, it's already starting out not perfectly smooth or straight. So what you want to do, you have a few options. The easiest one is to have some kind of rag or cloth. So this is actually a polishing cloth, but it doesn't have to be just any kind of rag you have around the house, like an old towel or something. And what I like to do, this is what I do, is I just grab it so it doesn't, you can do it with your fingers, but it can feel kind of hard on the fingers sometimes, especially if you're not used to working with wire, and you can kind of hurt your fingers doing it. But with a cloth, it protects your fingers. So you're grabbing it with the cloth, and I like to just kind of see how it's bent a little bit. Like I'm not just going straight like this, I'm bending it, and that pressure that gets applied, I'm like straightening it from the bend. It kind of straightens it out a little more than just going straight like this. So that's how I like to straighten it. Now sometimes if you have some really bad bends and kinks in it, this is not going to be enough. So another option that you could do, like this is pretty good. When it comes right off the spool, it's pretty good. The only problem you might have is if you have a really bad bend up here, when you tucked it through the hole, if you did a sharp bend, mine actually straightened itself out, but that could be the only problem. And it involves another tool. So if you're just doing it for the first time, you might want to try the cloth before you invest in a whole tool. But what it is it's called nylon pliers, and they're similar to pliers, but they have these plastic tips, and you can actually replace them when they get worn out. But what you do is you hold the wire in between, and it's not gonna scratch the wire, and the wire is also gonna slide through them because of their smooth plasticky texture. And so you just grab and pull. It is hard, you do have to pull. See how it like releases when I get to the end. So I am pulling hard. I'm not just like gently going across. And as it slides through the pliers, it straightens it out. So that's another option. This does work better, and especially for really messed up wire. So now I'm gonna cut myself 3 pieces of wire, and you need 3 pieces, and for this particular design that we're doing, they're gonna be 9 inches. So I've straightened the wire on my spool, and now I'm measuring out, and these right here are just wire cutters. So these are the Swanstrom brand. They came in a kit. It can be a little pricey to buy a whole kit, but if you just go to like Michael's or some kind of craft store that you have, like a local craft store, you can get fairly cheap tools. You can get them online too. If you prefer to buy online off of Amazon, they have the Xuron brand cutters, which you can get, that I used to use before I got this kit. And I would recommend, if you're just starting out and you don't know how it's going to go for you, if you're going to stick with it, then, you know, probably don't invest in like the really expensive, nice tools until you know that this is going to be your hobby. So I'm just cutting it. You'd literally just, like with little cutters, you just press and cut. One thing though, I took it out, but it came with like this little screw that you wind in there, and it sticks out. Let's see if I can show you on, I can show you on these. They have it too. So if it goes more, then they don't close all the way. So if you have pliers like that have a little screw, or I'm sorry, wire cutters that have a little screw in them, like mine did before I removed it, and you're cutting with them and you're noticing it's not cutting through all the way, or you're having trouble, it could just be a matter of loosening up that screw. They might not be able to close all the way. So that's just a little tip, something that I came across. But yeah, you just want to just cut your wire, and you're going to cut yourself 3 pieces of 9 inches long. So straighten it on your spool and then cut 9 inches, and then straighten it on the spool again and cut it again until you have 3 pieces. All right, so now I'm gonna attempt to show you what it looks like up close. Oh, my hand's so dirty when you run the wire through your fingers, because copper oxidizes, it darkens over time. Sometimes that rubs off on your hands. So I wanna show you the square wire up close so you can see what makes it square. So it has these flat edges. It's literally like if you take wire and you pull it through a hole, that's a square. It has 4 flat edges, and it has these little corners. So when you put them together, they can stack. Like right now it's not stacked nicely because you can see that middle wire, the corner of it is facing us, not the flat edge. So you just kind of, what I like to do is I like to hold the 3 of them together, and then I just kind of run them through my fingers. You can use a cloth again if you want, and it moves them just a little bit so they end up getting stacked together like this. So now the flat edges of the squares are touching, and we also have a flat edge facing us here in the front. And it looks like this. It just looks really nicely stacked here. And that's how we want them. That's how we're going to hold them in a minute. And we're going to use another wire, a thinner wire, to connect them to each other. But first I'm going to show you and tell you about that thinner wire. All right, so this is the thinner wire that we're going to use, and it is called half round, and I'll zoom in on it in a minute here. Again, it's dead soft copper, and mine's from Rio Grande, but you can try to find smaller quantities from resellers like on Etsy and eBay and stuff, because this comes in a big spool, 1 pound spool. And the gauge that I'm using is 24 gauge. It'll produce a nice thin wire. So how half round wire works is it's the equivalent of a 24 gauge round wire, but if you were to cut the round wire in half this way. So you have like the rounded part and then a flat part. And then it's missing the bottom half, like if this was an entirely round wire. it's been like split in half. So it's obviously thinner, right? It's like half as thin. So if you've ever worked with 24 gauge wire, whether it's round or square, that's going to be much more sturdy and thick. But when you cut it down to half round, it's very thin, very flexible. When you're straightening it, it's really easy to do with your fingers. You're not really going to need pliers, although you can use pliers sometimes if it's just really twisted all around. Those nylon pliers that I showed you before could work, but I'm just running it through my finger here, and it's just perfectly straight here. And the thing about this wire, I'm going to try and zoom in on it now to show you. I like to keep it on the spool, by the way, when I work with it. This one is harder to measure. You can measure it, but then you might, end up with excess. Like, you never really know how much you need to use. So I like to just keep it on the spool and take just the end of it when I'm working with it, and then when I'm done, I'll just trim it, and this is all still connected to the spool. This way I don't waste it. And by the way, the 9 inches that we cut of the previous wire, the thicker wire, that's going to be a good length for that stone. If you're ever unsure, I would cut longer. It's much better to have excess that you end up wasting at the end because you cut it off, it's excess, but that's much better than getting to the end and then having not enough wire to finish your design, because then you're going to waste even more, and then you've wasted like everything and you have to start over. So it's better to overestimate. That's what I'm trying to say when it comes to wire lengths. All right, so I'm going to try to zoom in and show you this half round wire. It might be hard because it's so thin. All right, so this is the rounded side of it. Hold on. I actually don't know. I can't even tell myself. Okay, this is the rounded side of it. Then if I turn it, this is the edge, thin little edge. And then if I keep turning it over, this is the flat underside. See how that looks flat versus the rounded side? Looks a little bit more rounded. All right, so the way that it works with this wire is when you're using it, you want that flat side to go down onto whatever wires you're wrapping it around, and you want this nice kind of rounded side to be what's visible at the top. So I'm going to take my 3 wires again. I stacked them, and I'm holding them in the middle, just roughly in the middle. Just kind of eyeball it and hold them in the middle, stack them so you have the flat edges like this, and they're not like all turned, and you have like the angles. So just kind of run it through your fingers. They want to stack. They naturally want to stack because of their flat edges, so it should be relatively easy. So hold them like this, pinch them with the fingers of one of your hands, and then we are going to take our half round wire. And you do have to work out what's more comfortable for you, like if you're a lefty versus a righty, like if it's easier to come from the back and wrap around this way, or if it's easier to come from the front and wrap around that way. Everyone's hands are different, but here's what's easiest for me is I take this wire, I bring it here on the top like this. I grab a little end. This is probably like 2 inches. And what I do back here to hold it, right, so it doesn't keep moving, is I put it right on top of my index finger, and then I use my middle finger and I just kind of pinch it just to stop it from moving, so I can kind of grip it a little bit and it's not all going to pull out. Okay, so I'm pinching my 3 wires here with my thumb and my index finger. Then I have this wire which is connected to the spool. I never cut it. I put it right on my index finger and I press down on it with my middle finger just to hold it tight in there. And here's what I'm going to do. The flat side, this is also very important. The flat side is touching my really dirty finger that I'm going to probably go wash after this a little bit. The rounded side is what we see. That's what's visible and facing us. The the rounded side. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna pull it down like this, and the flat side of it is gonna be touching these wires, and the rounded side is facing us, okay? And now we're gonna go up like this. Just bend it up. Wire is nice. It seems like it's string. It feels like string, but then it keeps its shape. It doesn't just fall down. So that's a nice thing about wire, but it also makes it harder because with string you pull and it just all pulls through, but wire doesn't want to do that. It likes to kind of stay where you bent it. So we've essentially made half of a wrap. You can see the flat side of it now. The flat side is facing us because the rounded side is here on the back, but we're seeing the underside. And now we're gonna pull it towards us. Don't be afraid to pull on it. It's not gonna pull through like a string. It's gonna stay because we've made that bend. And now we've wrapped it all the way around and made a small connection. Not enough of a connection that this is gonna keep my 3 wires together. So we're gonna have to do that again. Bring it around right next to the other one. And if yours ends up, I'm going to show you here what can happen. So just bringing it up, pulling it towards me. Say I don't do it nice and tight right next to it. Say I go like this. Now you have a little spacing, a little gap. That's okay. That is not a problem. Just push it together. So we're going to bring it up. And it can also overlap, so just be careful that you're not overlapping it, especially here in the back where you can't see what's happening. Just take a look that you haven't, gone like this and overlapped it with the other wires. You want it to be right next to it, not over it. Okay, so they're like also being stacked next to each other. So we're going to go down again. And you can see these little wraps that are forming, and you can count them. So I have 5 right now. I think that we need to do more. I don't think 5 is enough. So I'm just going to do this a bunch more times. So just bringing it around and around. It's not a problem if you do too many of these. It's more of a problem if you do too few. So just like with the cutting the wire, it's better to overestimate. So I've done this, and I just have a little tail end. I'm going to flip it over now. And this little tail end, I could bring it around, but at this point it's just so small, and it also is kind of bent from me holding it. It's better just to trim it. And I'm going to show you how to trim in a second, but first I want to show you another little bit here. So it is easiest when you're first starting out to just do it this way, to take yourself a nice little end like we did and wrap it around. But another way that this can be done is you have that wire end, you wrap it around a couple of times. It's a shorter wire end, so you've run out of wire. Say you only have like 3 wraps and you've run out of wire already. This is what you do to wrap with this side here. It's different. You can't just flip it over like this and do what we did where you bring it down, bring it up. You can't do that because it's connected to the spool. What's going to happen is it's going to twist around from that, and you're going to have the flat side facing you all of a sudden, and it's going to get all sorts of messed up. So I'm going to show you this little trick, but I don't think that you need to use it quite yet because this is adequate. What we did here, this is adequate. But if your little end was too short and you don't have enough wraps, here's what you do. You hold this piece with, in my case, with my left hand, because I'm a righty, and then this little wire, rounded part facing us, flat side touching my finger. I'm kind of squeezing it between my fingers, and that's going to prevent it from twisting around, and I also have control of where I put it, right, with my fingers. So I'm going to put it here right next to the other wire. I'm just holding it, and then this whole thing, I am twisting it with my fingers like this. So like you're flipping it from back to front. And then see how that made a little wrap? I'm gonna do it again so you can see. Just flipping it. So all I'm doing here is I'm just holding it to make sure it doesn't, you know, move out of place or get twisted around. And this side, we just twist. You can get even closer with your index finger here. Sometimes having this little bit of pressure here by kind of stretching it onto your index finger, sometimes that can just feel like you have more control. You don't want it to cross over. You want it to lay right next to the other wire, just like that. All right, so that's how you would do it if you were doing it that way, but wouldn't really be necessary if you grabbed a nice long end and you got all these wraps done. But I just wanted to show you. So what we're gonna do now, where's my wire cutters here? Okay. So what we're gonna do now is we are going to cut this wire, but we are gonna cut it in a way where it doesn't stick out the end. So let me show you the wrong way. So if I cut it like this, it sticks over the edge, right? You want it to be shorter, but not super short, just a little bit shorter than the edge, like this. So let me press down on it a little bit so you can see. See, it's just a little bit shorter than the edge. And then same thing here. Just snipping it off with my wire cutters, just like that. Shorter than the edge. This one's just barely shorter than the edge, but it's fine because it's shorter, so it's not gonna stick out over the edge. That's the only reason for that. Okay, so now our little wire ends are both here on this side. That's also very important. You want them to be on this side, on the same side, I mean, because we're gonna cover them up later with the stone. So they need to be on the same side. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take my pliers. These are Swanstrom pliers. They came in the kit that I mentioned earlier, but you can use any pliers. The nice thing about these is they're very pointy. They have a very fine tip, but I'm gonna show you another pair that you can get. You can get these on Amazon. Mine are really yucky and dirty, but they're the Xuron, and they are called tweezer nose. I think it says it here, tweezer nose pliers. And they also have very nice, very fine tips. See that? They're both very fine tipped. So these are pretty affordable. They're on Amazon. And I can leave links for everything for you. But what you want to do with your pliers is you just want to press. So you don't, first of all, you don't want this wire end to be moved. Like if it's like this, just push it back so everything is together. And of course, don't push it so far that it goes onto this. Let me demonstrate that too. Of course, now I can't pick up my wire end. I just want you to see all the things that can happen. Okay, so say your wire end is like this. It's on them. You don't want it to be on the wires. You just want to gently push it off of the other wires. Just very carefully. If you push too hard, you might move the wires underneath it. We're just going to move it off of the wires until it's lined up with them like this. And now we are going to just squeeze it in between our pliers. You don't have to squeeze super hard, but just give it a nice firm pressure and just press. And here's what happens. You can see it by comparison to the other side. It is just flatter and pressed more nicely together. I'm just going to also press this way just a tiny bit. That's going to move up this little wire end. Okay, so that's all you have to do is just press down on this. Press, 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 press. And what can happen is it can separate your wires a little bit. So here's how you squeeze them back together. All right, so I'm going to show you how we can squeeze those wires together. You can leave them like this. I mean, the spacing isn't really that bad. It's not really going to be noticeable. But if it's bothering you, if you're a perfectionist like me, here's how you squeeze these together. You don't want to do it here on this side with the wire ends, because how we do it is like this, and doing it on this side, you're going to push these wire ends onto the rest of the wires. So flip it over. Oh, there's an even bigger gap here. Flip it over to the back, or whatever, the other side, and just bring your pliers on the edges, just press them against those square wires and just gently push like that. And it gently pushes them together. There's still that little gap there, but that's okay. Go over it again by squishing over it just like this, just like we did initially, and then press them together again and squeeze over it again. Now, nice, compact, tight, no gaps. And this is like super zoomed in. You'd have to look so closely to even see anything. So here's the next thing that we're gonna do. We are going to make a bend in this so that the point of our teardrop shaped stone can fit in there. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna flip it back over onto the side that has the little wire ends. And I'm gonna grab it with my pliers. And this is a little tricky. It's not gonna come out perfect. I'm gonna show you how to troubleshoot it. But you're gonna grab it roughly halfway. So you want the edge of your pliers here to be halfway. So another way that you could do this, if you're a perfectionist, is you could try to find where that halfway mark is, and you can dig your nail in there to make like a little separation. I don't think I'm capable of doing. Oh, I am. Oh, that's not really halfway, is it? Maybe one more over. Is that halfway? There we go. That's halfway, I think, right? Is that the same amount of wraps? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that's right. So you could do this, and that way when you're grabbing with your pliers, you're grabbing half. And this is the other half. Or you can just eyeball it. Honestly, I don't do this most of the time. I just eyeball it and I bend. So we're holding with our pliers, just holding it tight, and then with this finger, just push on it. And it's pushing up against the edge of the pliers, and it's bending. It's making an angle. So see what we did? We made a little angular bend there. So I'm just gonna do that again. I'm gonna hold it more with the tip of my pliers because it's thinner and it gives me more space to bend. Like watch, if I hold it here, look at that, I can't even bend it anymore. But if I hold it, oh, why does my camera keep getting blurry? If I hold it like this, there is more space for me to bend. And what I like to do is I also like to hold it on the other side and bend this side. So I'm like bending both sides. Okay, and this is what you're gonna end up with. Sometimes the little wraps can be a little higher on one side, a little lower on the other side. It's hard to get it perfect. You have multiple options here. If you want to get it perfect, you can use your nails to kind of just move the little wraps around, kind of push them a little bit if they need to be higher on one side. You can use your pliers to kind of grab, like this side seems to me like it's maybe just a teeniest smidge shorter, so I'm kind of gonna grab it and I'm just gonna bend it a little bit to make it meet up. Another thing that you could do is you can unravel. So I'll do that for an example here. Let me make this side longer. because it's hard to bend it perfect. So I'm gonna bend this side so it looks like it's a little longer. There we go, this is a little longer, like one wrap longer, right? And I'm gonna unravel that little wrap. So I'm gonna grab that little end just by squeezing my pliers and trying to pick that up. And this is such a little perfectionist thing, honestly. If yours is like this, you don't need to do it. Don't feel like the stress or the pressure of having it to be super exact and perfect. But I just want to show you what to do if you do need to do that for your own peace of mind. So I've unraveled it. Here it is. All you have to do now is just trim it. Leave yourself, again, that little wire end like we did before that is going not all the way across. I know it's harder for you to see now, but I'm just going to push that wire end up because it was pretty low down, and I'm going to press on it so it's not sticking up into the air, and that's all. It's now similar amount of wraps on each side. And for your little angular bend, it can be either wider or skinnier. It depends on your stone. So what you want to do is take your stone and put it in there. So mine actually fits perfectly. If it didn't, if it was a little bit too narrow, so if it's a little bit too wide, you would just hold it and you would bend it a little more, right? But if it's a little bit too narrow, I'm going to show you narrow. Okay, if it's a little bit too narrow and your stone isn't getting down in there, you just open it up. You just hold it and just open it a little bit until it just fits good in there, like that. All right, so now I'm gonna move my camera because I'm gonna show you how to bend this frame around the stone. All right, so here is a flat surface, like a table, and you wanna put your stone down and put that frame right around that little point. That's why I think a teardrop shape is a little bit easier than an oval. Oval can kind of move around. It's a little bit trickier for your first try, for your first stone. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my index finger here, and I'm gonna push my stone with my thumb so it's down in there, because sometimes it can, you know, move around and slide up. So I'm pushing it in there so it doesn't move. I'm squeezing from here to here with these two fingers. I'm squeezing. And then these wires, first of all, take a good look at them, that they're still stacked nicely together, how they were before. If any of them start to crisscross, sometimes they can as you were messing around with everything, you can just go over them with your fingers and make sure that they are not crisscrossed. Okay? See how mine are all still stacked together, the three wires? Nothing is crisscrossing. If you have a wire, that kind of moved and things are getting crisscrossed, just grab it here where they're not crisscrossed and just pull them smooth until they're just all straight and proper, how they're supposed to be. Because if they've crisscrossed, that's going to mess up everything later. So I am squeezing from here to here so the stone stays tightly in there, doesn't start to move up. And then these groups of wires, I'm using my other fingers to kind of push on them. They have this nice flat edge from how they're stacked. I'm also pushing it down onto the flat surface. I'm not letting it come up into the air and get on my stone. So down onto the flat surface, and I am just bending in with one hand. And then the other edge, you might have to kind of lift it up a little bit and cross it over, because they're not going to be able to bend. They start hitting each other here. They start hitting each other. So you might have to take one set of ends and put it over the other set of ends like this, so it, you know, doesn't stop you from bending them. All right, so let's come back to where we were now that I've done that with the ends. So I'm bending both sides like that. See how I've bent them, and this one is on top. I have extra trouble here because this is like a fluffy surface and the wires don't want to slide smoothly across. They keep getting caught on it. So make sure you use a smooth, non-fluffy surface. So here's how it's looking. So I'm just going to hold it here. And then these wires, I'm going to start to kind of curve them with my finger just a little bit. And what you can do, if that's hard for you to do, you can lift it up. You can hold it here where this little bend is, right where the stone is ending. And then you can take these wires and just start to curve them like this. I don't know if it's easier to do in the air or on the ground, but either way, start to put a little curve into your wires. And while you're at it, check that they have not crisscrossed, that they're all still stacked nicely together. If they've crisscrossed, fix them. All right, so here's where we should be at this point, like this. So now that you've put those little bends in them, you can bring them together like this. And this is what we want. Now for me, it's easier to do this next little part in the air, but it could be easier for you to do it on a table because then you have that nice support of the table. But I'm just gonna lift this up and put it on my fingers because it's easier for me. So as we have these together, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a sharper bend, because right now our bend is, you know, a curve. So I'm putting a sharper bend in one direction and then in the other direction, and then in that direction again, and then in this direction again. And every time I'm trying to get it centered. Like obviously now it's going off to this side, and now it's going off to this side. And now trying to get it to go straight up and be centered like this. So let me put it down again and show you. This is what we're trying to achieve. All right, so now I'm gonna lift it all up in the air and go back to my original view. Now we're done using a flat surface. All right, so here is our frame. Here it is coming at the top with those little bends we put into it. And I'm gonna troubleshoot some things with you here. So there's a few things that can happen sometimes. I'm gonna mess mine up to demonstrate what sometimes happens. Okay, so sometimes the way that these come together, oh, that wasn't enough, messed up. I can't even see it. Okay. Sometimes they come together, one side or both sides is at a little bit of an angle. Like it got like twisted and moved upwards, if you know what I mean. So what you can do is you can come down to a part where these are all nice and flat. Hold on, I'm gonna hold it this way. It's still not really noticeable. I didn't mess up very well, but if it happens to you, you'll know what I mean. It's like the whole thing is like twisted like this. So you just grab them and you just like put it back how it's meant to be. And then you have your nice flat edge. And then your wires here stacked on the sides. Nothing is crisscrossing over. And then these little bends here, also my wires, look, they're starting to not be as nice together, so I have to kind of run my fingers over them to make sure they're in this nice little stack. This one wants to kind of pop up, but that's okay because it's together here where it matters. So if you want to reinforce these little bends, what you can do is you can take them, see where the little bend is, you can visually see it. You can put your pliers there and you can just bend a little bit so it's not too much. And you can have a sharper little bend. So now one of my bends is sharper and the other one is more of a curve. So I'm just going to grab my other one, sharpen it up a little bit like that. And let me grab my stone, because I don't want to make this frame smaller. I want it to stay the same shape as my stone, but I'm gonna have to push on it a little bit to bring these together and have them be kind of flat. Because see, there was they were going out this way, but you want them to be together like this. And then if your stone is feeling loose, that means your frame got a little loose, and that's okay. You can just press on it very gently, just a little tiny bit to squeeze it tight. And now I'm just gonna shove my stone in there. Now it's nice and tight. It's so tight, don't do this at home because you don't want your stone to fall out and shatter. I've done that too many times. But look, oh, I lied, it's not staying put. Let me try that again. It's so tight in there that sometimes it just stays in there based on the pressure of the wires. All right, so we've made our frame. We've brought these wires together. They're not crisscrossed. They're all nicely stacked. And you have 3 wires, then they're stacked here with the other side, so they're on top of the other 3 wires. Like if I'm holding it like this, they're on top of or on the side of. All right, this is kind of hard to achieve, I'm not gonna lie. Have it all stack and be nice like this, it might take, you know, a little maneuvering. Once you get them all together like this, hold it with your fingers, and I'm grabbing my half round wire again. Still on the spool, just grabbing an end of it, giving myself a few inches, maybe like 3 inches. And let me find the flat side of it. Okay, this is the flat side of it. So doing a similar thing where I'm putting it here, I'm kind of pinching it down so it doesn't move. I have the flat side of it on my finger, the rounded side up. That's the side I'm looking at, it's the rounded side. And I'm bringing it the same thing that we did, up and around and down. Feel free to pull on it. And up. Let's see if I can zoom in even closer. Oh, now it's blurry. There we go. And up. And around. Just like this. So you just keep doing it for a little bit. And now I still have a tail end. I could do it more, but I'm not going to. This is adequate. I don't know how many this is. It's hard for me to see my camera. 1, 2, 3, maybe like 6 or 7. So what I'm going to do with this little end is I'm going to push it through from back to front through this frame. And then here on the front, I'm going to grab it with my pliers. And I'm just going to pull on it. And as I'm pulling on it, I'm also pushing it up. So it's not down here, it's up. Pull and push it up like this. And that's a good way of getting rid of your wire end, because then you can come in here with your wire cutters and just cut. You can't even see it almost, just tiny little end in there. All right, so that's how we connected. Now things become so much more easy, so much easier. If you got to this point, then great job. It's gonna be better now. Keeping all these wires straight from crisscrossing, keeping them stacked together, that was the hardest part. So here's our frame. Everything's connected now. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take the frontmost two wires, here they are, our frontmost two wires, and we're gonna bend them towards us like this. So now we have a front and a back. Before, either side could have been either, but now that we've tucked this little wire end through here and we've bent these forward, this is our front. This is officially our front. So what I like to do here, sometimes when you just bend these with your hands, they can separate, they can be uneven. So you can get in there with your pliers and you can kind of bend them forward. Now I'm just going to run them through my fingers and kind of press them together as well. It's a little bit better than they were. And what we're going to do now, so if you are having trouble with what I'm about to show you next, which is the twisting, this wire is connected to the spool. So we're going to have to do the twisting around method. You can't just wrap like this with your hand. But if you're having trouble with that, just take a nice long piece of wire, I don't know, like 10 inches or something, that's probably too long, and just trim it, and it'll no longer be connected to the spool, and then you can do it the old-fashioned way of just, you know, wrapping it around, just like this, okay? But let's try this first, because this is a little easier in the sense that you don't have to cut your wire, and you're gonna use up exactly how much wire you need and then trim it. So first of all, I'm gonna tighten up the strap. Look at that. That got a little bit unraveled. So I'm gonna tighten that up, and I'm guiding this with my hand. My index finger and my thumb, I'm kind of squeezing the wire between the two and guiding it. And with this hand, I'm twisting the whole entire piece. So this wire doesn't move, it stays like this. What makes the wire go around is the twisting of the piece. So I'm pushing on it with my nail to get it nice, tight, close in there. I'm turning this whole piece around, and I'm guiding that wire, making sure there isn't huge spacing, but it also isn't crisscrossing. It's just going right up against the previous wire, the previous wrap. So I'm guiding it and turning the whole piece around, just like this. And once you get the hang of it, oh, look at this, my wire twisted right here. See that? Where it's going from half round, and then now the flat side is facing. So you just want to untwist it. Sometimes it just naturally has a little twist in it. But if you were to, you know, not do this method, it would just have like a million twists everywhere. So again, guiding it, turning it, guiding it, turning it. Once you get the hang of it, it can go pretty quickly, and you can just kind of turn. But if for whatever reason you don't like this method, it's hard for you to hold and turn, I'll show you. So now that I did half of it this method, I'm going to show you the other method. So I'm going to trim the wire nice and long. This is probably like 8 inches long or something. Now I'm going to make sure it's not twisted. Right here it has a little kink in it, so I'm just gonna turn it, go over it with my nails, just run it through. You can also get, if you have nylon pliers, run it through your nylon pliers. Mine are really worn out, so they are not even like gripping this wire because it's so thin. But run it through to straighten it. And here's what you would do if you don't want to do the whole turning thing. So now that it's no longer connected to anything, we can do what we did before, where we just take it. I'm going to hold it this way so you can see the little wraps. Bring it up, bring it down, bring it up, bring it down, and make each little wrap like this. Now you're just working with one hand and the other hand is just holding things still. So it could be an easier method than the twisting. All right, so we are gonna do this and then I'll measure. Usually just under an inch is a good size for a bail. The bail is that little loop or hook type of thing sticking out of the pendant that you put your either cord necklace or whatever you're going to put the pendant on, chain, you're going to put that through the bail. And so the size of your bail matters for whatever you're going to put through it. You want that to fit. But generally, it's okay if there's spacing. You can literally just push on it with your fingers to get rid of that spacing. This is long enough. I don't have any very thick necklaces, but say you have like a nice thick beaded necklace that you want through your bail, just go for a little bit longer. Make it a nice big bail so it fits through there. So here's what I'm gonna do. First I'm gonna measure this for you. Let me measure it for you. So it's easier to measure in millimeters because, like, what is this? It's smaller than an inch. It is 20 millimeters, okay? Or if you want it in inches, it is a little bit more than half an inch. So what we're gonna do now is, this is our front. Remember, this is our front. So then this is our back. So on the back, we're gonna trim this little wire off and leave ourselves a little end, just like we did before. And we're gonna take that wire end and press down on it. And you can just press over, just gently over this whole thing. Kind of flattens it down, makes the wire stay a little better. Has like a flatter look now. All right, so now is the part at which I think it's good to put your stone in there. You could do it after we finish the bail, but I think it's just good to secure the stone. That way you're not accidentally, mushing this frame around and changing the shape of it as you're holding all these things, So the stone's gonna go in like this. How it stays in, I'll show you, is the back, we're gonna close up this hole on the back and it's gonna trap the stone in. So here's what I'm gonna do. So this is our back and this is the backmost wire. If you are capable of grabbing with your pliers only the backmost wire and not the other wires, you would just grab it, and I'm gonna put my thumb here so I don't bend like the top. Let's grab it a little lower down. Let's grab it here. Make sure it's only that wire. I'll show you what to do if you're having trouble and you're grabbing multiple wires in a minute. And holding it here, putting a bend in it, like this. And now that we've bent it a little bit, you can stop holding it here. I just wanted to hold it here so it doesn't, bend it like a ton. Now we can bend it a little bit more. So that this little hole here goes all the way across the side of the stone, all the way up to this curve. That's going to hold the stone in on one side. Now on the other side, I'll show you what to do if you're having trouble grabbing just the wire. Get in here with your nail or something and make a separation like this. Now it'll be much easier to grab only this wire and not all the wires, because you don't want to grab and bend all the wires. So I'm just holding it up there, putting a bend in it like this. And now if I put my stone in, this is the flat side of the stone, that's the back of the stone, this is the back of the pendant. So I'm just sliding my stone into the frame, kind of popping it in here on the edges. If you're having trouble, then you might need to just push on this edge a little bit, bring it up a little bit, get your stone in there. All right, it's pushed in there. So this is what the back looks like. It's trapping the stone in. The stone isn't going to pop out the back because we have these wires. And see how this wire is raised a little bit, because initially I separated it. That's okay, just push it back down, either with your finger or your pliers, just push it back down. So our stone is trapped from the back. Now we're going to trap it from the front. So from the front, oh, look at that. Somehow my little wrap moved, and it's a little bit higher on this side and a little bit lower on this side. So I can either unravel it or I can just move it. Just push on this side with my nail. Try to get it a little higher so it matches the other side, and then I'm going to push on the other side, try to get it a little lower. There we go. Now they're even. All right. So I actually really like the Zuron pliers for this. And let me show you why. Because the tips of them, even though they might be wider this way, they're like flatter this way. Because they're so thin and fine, they can just really get into the little crevices. Whereas the Swanstrom pliers, they're really great also. They are just a little thicker, I think. They're like thinner this way, but they're a little bit thicker here. I don't know. They're very similar. Whichever pair you have, you're going to have no problems with. But I guess I'll demonstrate with the Swanstrom pliers, because in case you buy that kit or something, or in case you have that kit. But if you have the Zuron ones, it'll be just as easy. So if there isn't a little gap, make that gap. Make it with your nail or pliers. Create that little gap, because you want your pliers to fit into it like this. And then we're going to slide the pliers all the way down, push down to the end. And then here where the wrap starts, you can't push anymore. See how they're just holding this wire? What we're going to do is we're going to press them closed, and we're going to tilt them up like this. So like this kind of motion. And that creates a bend like that. Let me do it again. Tilt them forward like this. And you want it to be a decent bend. You want it to go onto the edge of your stone, where the stone, see how it's thicker here? Because it's a cabochon, and then it's thinner here. You want it to be on the thinner part. You don't want it to be just like right here, because then the stone might be able to pop out. But if it's on the thinner part, now the stone can't fit through, because we've created a window on one side. We'll finish the window in a minute. And the window is smaller than the stone, so we can't fit through the window. All right, so we're just gonna create that little gap again. Get in here with our pliers, push all the way down until we get to that wrap, and turn. And if one of your sides is, more or less, just don't be afraid to go back in there and turn it some more to match the other side. If you did one a little more than the other, totally fine. If you have any spaces, any little gaps on your wires, you just press on them with your pliers. Even these, I don't have spaces on these, but you can. Oh, look, there's a little space right there. I don't know if you can see that. Pressing down with my pliers on any little gaps. Any little gaps or any little spaces, pressing down. Pushing this little wire back because I want it to come onto the front. There we go. So here's what it looks like. The frontmost wires are forming a window on the front. Then we have our side wires just on the side. And then we have our back wires closing up the stone. Now be careful on the back that you don't make these too small and too low so that up here the stone isn't trapped and it can kind of pop through this taller part. So you want the whole edge of it to be held by this wire like that. All right, so now our stone is good. It's trapped, it's really secure. It doesn't, you can try to wobble it, doesn't go anywhere, doesn't do anything. So we're done with that, and we are like 90% done here. We just have to finish up this top portion. So here's what I'm gonna do. There's so many different ways that you can do this top portion. And that's what a lot of my designs and my tutorials focus on, is finishing up the pendant. So if you can get this part down, you can follow the end of other tutorials, just to have more variety of how to finish the top portion. But I'll show you something really nice and simple here that'll be great for a beginner. So these wires, these two wires here on this side are kind of coming up. If you just see them and grab them, make sure you grab the right ones, not the ones from the other side, but the ones from this side. Just follow them along, grab them, push them to the side. Same thing here. These two wires, you can, whatever angle is easier for you to look at. I mean, now you know which two wires it is, so you're not going to grab the wrong ones. Push them to the side. So we've separated them. Now we have an area for our bail. So for the bail, I actually really like to bend it with my finger. I don't know why, it's just the easiest for me. It gives me a nice little curve here. But if you're having trouble with that, grab literally any rounded thing. A pencil, a pen. If you want a fancy tool, you can get, these are bail making pliers. I got a million years ago from Michael's, back when I was living in America. I don't know if they still make them, but I'm sure they have something similar. And you can use these little rounded things. This one looks like a good size, maybe this one actually. And you can use that. You can bend the wires, or your bail rather, you can bend your bail around that. Up to you, whatever is easier for you. Bend it into a rounded shape, but before you get carried away here, bending it too much, here's an important part. We need these wires to go through this gap. So, easiest way to do that is, before you bend this all the way around, curve these wires, curve them in there, and put them through like this. Okay, so now, as you bend your bail, they're gonna automatically go through here. Okay, so when I'm bending it with my fingers, how I like to do it is I'll give it a nice rounded shape, and then I grab them with my pliers actually, and I bend it the rest of the way with my pliers. I just kind of bring it down because it's hard to get my finger in there at this point. And I like to bring it down so that this little wrap that we did ends just somewhere in this little general vicinity. You don't want it to go too low, but you don't want it to be so high that your little wrap ends up here and then you have the naked wires revealed. So what we're gonna do now that we've done that, see there's this little gap, it's not like a tight bail, so we're just gonna get in here. I'm just trying to find the best way so you can see. Get in there with your pliers and just press on it. And as you're pressing on it, these wires that are popping through, push on them upwards, bend them upwards, and it'll stay. So now we've created the bail, and we have these wires coming out the front. If your bail's a little wonky, if it's leaning to one side, if it's turned to one side like this, that's okay. You can just grab it with your pliers, straighten it out. Okay, not a problem. So with these wires, let's see which one is from which side. So this is this side, and this is the other side. See? They're not crisscrossed. So what we're gonna do with these wires is we're gonna just take one of them. We're gonna just kind of pull on it a little bit to make sure it's tight. And then we're going to, either with your hand or your pliers, bend it from the front to the back, like this. And then here on the back, we're going to trim it, and we're going to leave ourselves a little end. Basically like the size of maybe these two wires here. That's the little length that we've left ourselves. Because what we're going to have to do with that little end is take it. So you need a tip so you can grab it with your pliers. That's why you don't want to cut it super, super short. And we're going to bend that with our pliers this way into the bail. You can only really bend it so far, then you start hitting the other wire. So what you want to do after you've bent it in this direction is you want to come in here with your pliers and kind of push it in there, like I'm squeezing it from both sides. I'm squeezing this top and the bottom of this wire and just pushing it in there and squeezing, and now the end is tucked away. And I've created a little wrap. This wire comes and it wraps around and then it ends. So now our bail is connected and it's secure and it's not going anywhere. It's not going to open up because one of the wires is wrapped around. Now this other wire, you can do the same thing. You can wrap it around just like that. Or if you want something a little easier, because one wire is enough to keep your bail secure. So you pull on it like you saw me do, just so it's nice and tight. Just pull on it and get in here as close as you can with your wire cutters. Use this flat side because that'll let you get in closer. Just really get in there. Be careful that you're not cutting any other wires, just this one wire, and trim it. And there it is. You can see the end of that wire, but we went nice and close, so it's not sticking out this way. It's just right in there. We're gonna cover that up, so don't worry if you don't like the look of that little wire end there. So now we have these wires and these wires, and there's so many different designs that you can do with them, but I'll show you something nice and simple. A similar thing that I've done in the past is I'm gonna swoop these wires across, and here's how I'm gonna do that. So there's a back wire and there's a front wire. So the frontmost wire, I'm just gonna take it and I'm gonna bend it towards myself. Now it's pointing forward, right? And now I'm just pushing on it with this finger, but I'm bracing the piece with my other hand. Now I'm pushing it all the way across. So now it's going forward, and now I've bent it across my bail here. And now it's already forming a natural curve, but I'm just gonna help that curve. I'm gonna curve it a little bit and curve it so that it goes here. And it almost covers up that little wire end. Our second wire is gonna be right next to it, so it'll cover it up. So just like this, a little swoop. And now I'm gonna pinch it this way so my swoop doesn't move, and I'm gonna bend the wire to the back, and then almost like across the back a little bit. So that we're gonna do the same thing. So maybe like 3 millimeters if you like to measure, or roughly kind of the size of these two wires. Actually ended up a little bit longer, but we're trimming ourselves a little wire end like this so that we can take that little wire end. You need to be able to grab it and turn it inwards. There it is in there. And now we're just gonna squeeze. We're gonna come in here with our pliers, hold it on both ends here, and just squeeze. And it pushes it down. And now this little swoop is connected. If you have a really large gap between your swoop and your bail, you can push on it to make it a little smaller. It will naturally be somewhat of a gap there. All right, so now with our second wire, we're gonna follow it along. It's kind of like right next to the other wire anyways, so we're just gonna follow it along and bend it. So we're bending it forward, just right up against the other wire there. Bending it across the front here, again, just right next to the other wire. Come in here, kind of bend it this way. It's just laying up right against that other wire there. And that's it. If you like there to be a little bit of a space between the wires, like see this is right up against the other wire, or you can just kind of push back on it a little bit and then create a little space like this. Up to you. But either way, just press down on it, hold that so it doesn't move out of place, bend it around. That space ended up being a little bit closed up here, but you still see it up there. I kind of like the look of that, to be honest with you. And then here on the back, we're just gonna do the same thing. Trim it. Leave yourself a little wire end that is like 3 millimeters big. Or 4, I don't know, maybe I should have measured it. And we're just gonna press it in there. Push it in, press it down. Just like that. And now, it's connected. All we have left is these 2 wires, so there are multiple things you can do with them. I was trying to think of what would be the easiest. So you can swoop them around just like this, do the same thing that we just did, swoop the other one, turn them, trim them, push them in there. But maybe you're having trouble with that. Maybe that was a hard part for you. So here's something else that we can do. We're gonna take the wire, we're gonna kind of bend it like this so it's following these other ones along. Then we're gonna raise it a little bit so we can get in there with our cutters. And we're gonna cut it roughly where it starts to meet this edge wire. Okay, make sure you're cutting just that. That's why I raised it up so I don't accidentally cut other wires along with it. Sometimes with wire cutters, if they're really good ones, they'll just cut through multiple wires for you. So now that we've done that, we're gonna take, let me move this out of the way for a second. We're gonna take that little wire end and we are gonna push it in here. We're gonna put it on top. See how we have this little wire here from before? We're just gonna take this little wire end. You know what? I need to cut it just a smidge smaller. Just a teeny little bit. There we go. I don't want to bend it too much, and I was having trouble getting it across this wire here. So we're just taking it, putting it on the other side of this wire. So if this wire is like a little shelf, then this end of the wire is sitting on the shelf up there, just like that. And now you can't even see it. It's hidden, and from the front, it's hidden as well by that wire. And you can just do that with this as well. So just bend it in like a curved position. It's easier sometimes to look at this one from the back rather than the front. Here it is, we trimmed it. We just trimmed it where it kind of met up with this wire. Now we're taking that wire and we are sitting it on that shelf right next to the other wire. It's a little bit higher actually, but there it is. As long as it's kind of touching the wires in there, the wire end is hidden. You can't see it, you can't feel it. It's smooth. And now we've made a nice, simple, basic pendant with a cabochon There's one more thing I just want to show you real quick here. So sometimes you can kind of see this wire end here from the front. It's actually not too bad, but what you can do is you can come back here onto the back and you can take it and you can point it upwards instead. So I'm just taking it and I'm just pushing it so it's pointing up. You can even grab them both at the same time and just push them both up, and then just squeeze them again, because now they could have gotten a little bit unsqueezed from you doing that. Just squeeze them again, and now it's more hidden. It's like up behind these wires. So that's just a way to hide it. If your bail has moved, you can move it back. If it's too much tilted, ooh, almost dropped that, too much tilted to one side. But that is looking good, all even. So congratulations, your cabochon pendant is now complete. And one last little thing I want to show you here, sometimes as we work with our wire, since our pliers are metal, they can leave little marks, little scratches on our wire, and it's totally normal. It's kind of part of the piece. I think it kind of makes it look handmade, but if you have a big dent or scratch and it's just really bothering you, one thing you can do is you can take some sandpaper, like this one I can see here when I bent it. I think, hopefully the camera is picking that up. You can just take some sandpaper and just rub it. Or if it feels rough, like if you've pinched the wire and it's like a little sharp, then this is another reason to do that, so that it doesn't feel sharp. Just take a little piece of sandpaper and sandpaper it smooth. It just happens when we work with our tools. As you get more comfortable with it, you'll get less and less of it happening, but it still happens to me also, so it's just natural. But yeah, now it's nice and smooth. Nothing is pokey or pointy, and that's it. It is complete. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.